Good Tuesday evening, everybody. Chris McDonald with you here, very much alive and well at 8:49 in the East. The reason we're going on just about a 15-minute earlier is that Bill Federer is coming on in about 2 minutes, and it's a pre-recorded interview. I'll be back at the end. It's a little lengthy. Bill got a little lengthy tonight, and it's fine. He's got a lot of information, and we're going to be dealing with part 2 of Islam tonight. It's really a continuation of the one we did about 2 weeks ago with him. He's going to get deep into history, and he does a lot of the talking, but you're going to find it fascinating. Some of you will know some of this history, some of you won't. I learned a lot of things today that I was not aware of. And some of the discussion gets very deep, very intriguing about the nature of Islam, and some of it may disturb some virgin ears, so I'm just giving you a heads up that there's some adult talk in this relating to some things that Islam believes and does and has done in the past. But we here on the McFiles, we've never cared about virgin ears. We tell you like it is and hug you later. We're just telling you like it is a lot nicer these days. We've calmed down. We're not screaming no more. And but we still hug you afterwards. But we still tell you like it is. And we're trying not to scream no more. I want to thank everybody that was with us at 6 this evening for the live special with Stacy Shiflett. We've gotten some really good comments in already tonight about the show. I want to thank Stacy for being with us. And he did an excellent job discussing the situation in Baltimore. I will come back with an afterthought after Bill Federer's interview. I will say this before we get to Bill. Leslie Millway, please pray for her tonight. She was supposed to be with us tonight, and Juanita maybe even, but Leslie came down with strep throat today, and it's sad. I was looking forward to talking to my dear friend. We'll have her on soon, but our prayers for her and Bill, her husband, and the Lord bless them both. This Baltimore situation, folks, there's a lot of theories out there. There's a lot of, look, whenever something like this happens, it's a knee-jerk reaction that everybody wants to believe is something nefarious. And there's another group of the country that it's a knee-jerk reaction to just absolutely reject that. I tend to fall somewhere always in the middle of these things, that I don't discount the fact it could be something nefarious, but I also try to keep a head on a swivel mentality that until there's evidence of that, and plain evidence, not a YouTuber's evidence, because a YouTuber's evidence is not evidence. A YouTuber's evidence is their opinion. And I'll just leave it at that. But you have to make your call about this. It's a weird situation. I see things more prophetically than I do nefarious. I think that the historical location of this bridge and what happened just hours after America voted in the UN publicly, not privately, but publicly, to condemn Israel, I see a major tie between the two. I just do. Now, that's my take on it. I know a lot of other people have different takes, and trust me, there's a million of them out there tonight already. I'm just going to caution you as a listener. We've always tried to keep a level head about these things, and I encourage you to do the same, folks. Please do the same. Keep your head on the swivel. There's no doubt that there's something that, happened in Baltimore. It's sad, and we're thanking the Lord. Really, if you heard Stacy, it could have been a lot worse. If this would have happened in the middle of the day, hundreds probably would have perished. They'd have fallen into that river. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Many of them would have never come back. As it is right now, 2 have been found. 6 are missing. We're praying the best for the 6 that have been missing, and they're mainly construction workers that were on the bridge during the night, fixing the bridge with potholes and things like that. But our country is in need of prayer tonight, and I keep thinking of what Stacy said earlier tonight. He said Jonah didn't pray till he got in the belly of the whale. And folks, we're getting close. We're getting close to being in the belly of the whale. So maybe we need to pray now before we get there. That's just a thought. Now, I'm going to have more thoughts on that later. Listen, we're grateful that you're with us. Enjoy this interview. It's a little long, Goes about an hour and 15 minutes. That's why I'm starting a little bit sooner. May the Lord bless you tonight, and enjoy this little discussion about Islam with Bill Federer. It's part 2. He didn't even get finished with the whole thing. We're going to have him back on in about 2 to 3 weeks, and he's going to finish up part 3, which will be more of a modern look at Islam. And then we'll deal with Bill with some other things later this year. We're grateful you're with us tonight. And save your questions. Please, no questions during the interview. This is pre-recorded. If you got any comments, any questions, save those till the end. We will have a little time of discussion with you tonight on this McFile Tuesday night with the one and only, and my dear friend, and a great historian, a great Christian, a great man, Bill Federer of AmericanMinute.com. Enjoy. I'll see you after the interview right here. Stay with us. And a good evening, everybody. Chris McDonald with you on a very special McFiles special with my dear friend, Bill Federer, American Minute, and great guy. He's one of our favorite guests we have on. We had him on about 2-3 weeks ago, and we got about halfway done with his special on Islam, and we're going to let him pick it up here in just a second. Bill, it's good to see you tonight, as always, and I appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure, and we are really we get so much feedback when you're on that we wish we could get you on every day, every week if we could, but I know you got a schedule to keep to. But it's good to see you tonight, as always, friend on the McFiles. How are you?
Oh, great to be with you, Chris.
Good. We before we get into Islam, I do want to ask you one thing. It's ironic we're recording this roughly on the 26th of March, and the 25th, which was yesterday, as the day we're recording it. You have done the teaching on Christmas every year for us, and it's always fascinating. But I just wanted to remind people that you have taught us with your teaching that you believe that March 25th was probably the day, because 9 months from Mary, when the Holy Ghost impregnated Mary, that she carried the baby 9 months, and it would have been about March 25th. That would have been the time that happened, correct?
Right. It's called the Feast of the Annunciation, when the angel announced to Mary, and it dates all the way back. As a matter of fact, it's one of the earliest holiday celebrations within the church, both the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic, and it goes back to the little verse in the book of Luke where it says John the Baptist's father Zechariah was in the temple, and he was of the course of Abijah, and so King David divided the Levites into 24 courses, and they each took a week, and then a year, and then 6 months later took another week. So each course took 2 weeks a year, 6 months apart, and the dating of it goes back to Josephus, when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. He mentioned that the course of Jehoiarib was on duty. Well, they're the first course, and Abijah was the 8th course. So we know when the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in July, and so if you count off the weeks, then the last week of September would be the course of Abijah. And so if John the Baptist conceived the last week of September, the book of Luke says that 6 months later is when Mary was visited by the angel and she conceived. Right. And so 6 months after September 25th is March 25th. And then 9 months after March 25th is December 25th.
Interesting. Well, that's good. And I just wanted to get that little history minute as you send us out on those emails, our American Minute, and that's a good one. That's a good one to remember. But last time we were on, we were dealing with a very serious subject, and it's ironic, not in a good way. We just had this Moscow bombing, and it seems by indications, sort of hard to see what the media is saying is true sometimes, but even the Russian government is saying they do believe that this horrible incident in that nightclub was Islamic extremists. We've had the October 7th massacre of Israelis back in the fall of last year. Islam has maybe been quiet, but it's not gone away. It's still a threat. And I wanted you to come back and finish this great teaching you did starting about the threat of Islam, because I do believe, Bill, it is still one of the greatest threats facing us. I was reading a book this week, and one of the things the author mentioned, Mr. Richardson, he said that if we're not careful, if the Lord tarries any length of time, that Islam may very well overtake Christianity as being the biggest religion on the earth. And if you look at what's happening, they're doing it quietly, but Islam's not a quiet religion. They want war, and that's what Islam really means. It means submission or die. I mean, when you get down to it, because if you don't submit to the rule of Islam, then this sort of Islam comes out real quick, and it is a threat. And I want you to pick up where you left off, and I'm going to give it over to you now, because I do believe it's important to understand the history of this religion, because it's always been soaked in blood from the beginning. It's never been without blood, and it's never been without war, and it's never been without bloodshed and great terror attached to it.
Right. And all the violence would stop if America would just stop arming and training the Islamist terrorists.
It's great.
I mean, that's what would happen if Biden didn't keep insisting on arming and training the people in Gaza, and Biden left $85 billion worth of military arms for the Taliban. And during the Soviet-Afghan war, the CIA was arming and training the Taliban. And then President Obama, he gave all kinds of support to the terrorists. Hillary Clinton, the whole Benghazi thing was gun running. She was moving guns from Benghazi to try to take out Assad in Syria. And if we just would leave them alone, it would diminish. It sort of reminds you of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was weakened, and it was at that time getting along with the Armenians and the other minorities, but Germany needed oil. And so Germany went down to the Ottoman Empire and promised them guns for oil, that if the Turks from Kirkuk, which is now in Iraq, but it was part of the Ottoman Empire, if the Turks would supply oil to Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, then Germany would supply guns, armaments, machine guns, all the latest in military weapons to Abdul Hamid II, the Sultan. And so it was the Germans that whipped a movie that Christian Bale starred in. It was called The Promise, and it documents this period where it was relatively peaceful, but the Germans come in and whip the Turks into this war mode and supplies them with the guns in exchange for the Turkish oil. And so if the West would just stop arming and training the Islamist terrorists, then it would subside and be peaceful. But anyway, back to the ideology of Islam itself, there is a history that goes all the way back to Muhammad. And the Islamic history can be divided into three groups or three springs. That was the term when Anwar Sadat made a treaty with Israel, Menachem Begin. They both won the Nobel Peace Prize. And Anwar Sadat was praised by Billy Graham and Pat Robertson, and everything looked great until the Muslim Brotherhood assassinated him.
Right. Exactly.
His vice president was Mubarak, and he survived. He was the leader in Egypt, and he was working with America until Obama went over there and disinvited Mubarak from the meeting, and then filled the whole meeting with Muslim Brotherhood people. And so that was the beginning of what was called the Arab Spring, this resurgence of fundamentalist violent Islam thanks to Obama. And so we use this term spring. So there's been three springs of Islamic political and military expansion. The first one started in 622 with Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina. And it was an Arab expansion and Persian expansion. And that lasted until 1071 when the Turks invaded. And then the Turks converted to Islam, and the Seljuk Turks and then the Ottoman Turks. And their Turkish empire lasted until 1923 and the end of World War I, the end of the Ottoman Empire. And then the Muslim world began to westernize itself and become more peaceful until Al-Banna and 6 employees of the British-run Suez Canal Company start Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. And so that's the current expansion. But so this is the history. In the previous time together, we talked about the Arab-Persian expansion. And so now we're going to delve into the Turkish one. Right. But some definitions: the word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. And a Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah. And Islam believes there'll be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. So to them, world peace means world Islam. And it's sort of like Lincoln said during the Civil War, we all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. So when Lincoln said liberty, he meant freeing the slaves. When the Confederates said liberty, it was kicking the North out of their states. And so in Islam, the world's divided into two: the half that has submitted and the half that's in the process of submitting. The half that has submitted is called the House of Islam, the House of Submission, the Dar al-Islam. And the half that's in the process of submitting is called the Dar al-Harb, the House of War. So the non-Muslim world is supposed to be at war because it's in the process of being subdued, and the goal is to have the whole world subdued and submit to Allah, and then there'll be world peace. Now, what about moderate Muslims? Moderate Muslims believe the world will submit to Allah later, maybe in the distant future, maybe at the end of the world. Maybe it's even figurative. And since it's so far off, they really don't think about it, and they just want to live their lives and have their families, and they're content to have you as a friend and a neighbor. And but the fundamental Muslims, they think the world is supposed to submit to Allah now, and they're really excited. They want to help make it happen. Now, the dilemma is when the non-Muslim world, the West, shows itself really friendly, the fundamental ones view that friendliness as weakness, and they take that as an indicator that they're supposed to attack. So in the law of nature, weakness invites aggression every time. It's just the way the law of nature is. You have a lion chasing some zebras, and there's an injured zebra. Which one is the lion going to pounce on? The weak one. Weakness invites aggression. If dog's chasing you and you run, it's going to sense your weakness and it's going to run after you. But if you turn and yell at it and show strength, it'll turn and run away, right? And so in Islam, there's a concept: when your enemy is weak, attack. When your enemy is strong, retreat.
Exactly
and
right.
Bide your time until your enemy gets weak and then attack. And now the fundamental Muslim, they're not content with just killing the infidels. They want to kill the moderate Muslims because they view the moderate Muslims as having left the way of Allah, that they're not true followers. So the fundamental Muslims are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. Here is a interview with psychologist Nikolai Sennels. He says, Muslims instinctively see our lack of reaction as fear. It is an invitation to attack. So another word that needs defining is innocent. And so usually when terrorist attacks come on, the media will be quick to say, well, those terrorists don't represent true Islam because Islam says it's wrong to kill the innocent. Well, we need to define the word innocent. Innocent is a faithful follower of the way of Allah. So if you are not a faithful follower of the way of Allah, you are not innocent. And then it says, Allah loveth not those who reject the faith. Be ruthless to the infidels, make war on the infidels, fight those who believe not in Allah, kill the disbeliever wherever we find them. And so a little bit of a history. Muhammad did not have a son. He had a daughter, Fatima, and she was married to Ali and their son Hussein. And so was murdered by the Sunni. And so there's this forever hatred between the Sunni and the Shia. So Fatima is married to Ali, and the followers of Ali are called Shi'ali or Shiite or Shia.
Mhm.
And so 10% of Muslims are Shiite, and they're mostly in Iran. And they're more hierarchical, like with the Pope, with the Ayatollah on top. And so he dictates very authoritatively. Muhammad fought in lots of battles, and he had a general named Abu Bakr, and he fought with Muhammad in every battle. So Muhammad fought in 66 battles and raids, killing an estimated 3,000 people. And he got verses that says, Allah's given you the slave girls as your booty, and he got a fifth of the booty, and he would tell them, don't steal from the booty. And so after Muhammad died, Abu Bakr said, well, I know the way because I was with Muhammad in every battle. And so the Arabic word for the way is Sunni. And so 90% of Muslims are Sunni, and they're scattered around the world, and they're not as organized as the Shia. The different imams have a little flexibility. And so if an imam is more moderate, then their congregation, so to speak, is more moderate. If the imam is more fundamental, then their congregation is more fundamental, but it's sort of like the Protestants, right? Lots of different flavors. And so the history after Muhammad's death was Abu Bakr is the first caliph. He was the father of Aisha, who was the 6-year-old that Muhammad had a dream 2 nights in a row of him marrying the 6-year-old girl Aisha. They waited until she was 9, and so she was his favorite wife. And so Abu Bakr is killed, and then you have the next caliph, Umar, and then Caliph Uthman, and then Caliph Ali. He sort of unites them for a little while, but then he's murdered, and then you have Caliph Muawiyah, and the first century of caliphs is murder and intrigue, and they're all somehow related to Muhammad as a father-in-law or a son-in-law, and it reads sort of like the Cosa Nostra or the Sopranos or something. If you read through the history of that first generation, they're all, murdered and buried in their clothes, and then they have to retaliate because in Islam you have to regain your honor. And so the way you regain your honor is you have to defeat your enemies. So it's sort of the Hatfields and the McCoys. You'd have to just keep fighting back and forth and back and forth. So so you have an interesting teaching in the Shiite, and that's
Mahdi.
The Mahdi. And so this is, if you read their history or their prediction of the Mahdi, he's going to come back and he's going to kill all the Christians and kill all the Jews and kill all the apes and kill all the pigs. And so he fits the description of the Bible's Antichrist. So they're looking forward to the Mahdi, the Shiite are, and but from the biblical aspect, they're looking forward to the Antichrist. And now, where the moderate Muslims are content to live and be friends with you, the fundamental Muslims want to overthrow. And so here's a quote from Ajim Choudhary of Islam for UK, 2009. We have had enough of democracy and man-made law. We call for a complete upheaval of the British ruling system and demand full implementation of Sharia in Britain. And they're doing it. And they have no-go zones. And they have, Pakistani mayors and all this stuff. And so they're gradually implementing this. Now, what is Sharia law? The word Sharia just means law. And what is it? Well, it's trying to be like Muhammad. He's the perfect Muslim. And his life is called the Sunnah, which means the way. And so Muhammad's life went through 3 stages. He was a religious leader and a political leader and a military leader. And so just like Christians want to be like Jesus, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Fundamental Muslims want to imitate Muhammad, and his life is the Sunnah, so they want to be like him. Except there's an important difference. Christians do not believe they go to heaven by being like Jesus. They believe they go to heaven because Jesus died on the cross to pay for all their sins.
Exactly right. Great
And
point.
they want to live like Jesus to show the rest of the world how much God loves them. Not so in Islam. They think their chances of going to paradise, they don't call it heaven, they call it paradise. Their chances of going to paradise are proportional to how closely they can imitate Muhammad.
Interesting.
And so what Muhammad permitted is permitted. It is called halal. What Muhammad did not permit is not permitted. It's called haram. So Islam is a long list of halals and harams, a long list of do's and don'ts. It is the ultimate religion of do's and don'ts. And so Muhammad liked cats. Cats are halal. They are permitted. Muhammad did not like dogs. Dogs are haram. They are not permitted. And so you go to the local imam, you say, is this permitted? Yes, yes, that's halal. Oh, great. Okay. Is this permitted? No, no, that's haram. That's not permitted. Well, why is it haram? I'm sorry, you can't ask that question. But I want to know why. If you ask again, we'll kill you for doubting Islam. You just obey. Literally, you don't ask. A friend of mine, Mark Christian, had grown up in Egypt. His father was an imam, and he wanted to follow in his footsteps, and he wanted to be a really, really good imam. And he's studying all the whys. Why did we do this? Why did we do that? And there are things like, why is it necessary to have 4 witnesses of a rape in order to have it be considered a rape? Well, Muhammad's wife, Aisha, the one he married at 9 years old, they were going on a caravan, and it stopped in the desert. She went over the sand dune to relieve herself and came back, and the caravan's gone. And a straggler on a donkey sees her, picks her up, takes her to Muhammad. And the Muslim men said, well, you got to kill the guy because he raped her. And the little girl said, well, he didn't rape me. And so Muhammad said, okay, tell you what, there needs to be 4 witnesses of the rape, or it never happened. And then an infidel cannot witness against a Muslim. So if you rape someone and the witnesses are all non-Muslims, well, they can't testify. And then women, Muhammad said a woman's mind's deficient, so it takes 2 women to testify against 8 men, against a man, 2 women to testify against a man. So you would need 8 Muslim women to say they saw it. But the worst part of it is, if you can prove that the woman was raped, she's the one who gets whipped 100 times because she allowed herself to be used as a tool of Satan to tempt the man. And so the women wear the burqas to look unattractive on purpose, because if they look attractive and get raped, it's their fault. So it's a little different. So Sharia law comes from 4 sources. The Quran, which are private revelations to Muhammad, and he got those from the 2 cities he lived in. So when he was in Mecca, he gets verses that are more religious and relatively more peaceful. When he's in Medina, he gets verses that are more political and militant. And the later verses supersede the earlier verses, the same way that we want to follow the New Testament, where it says, love your enemies, versus the Old Testament, where Moses and Joshua and David were wiping out tribes and Philistines and so forth. So the Quran's in 2 verses, 2 sets of verses, the Meccan verses and the Medina verses. But Sharia law also comes from the Hadith, and since the goal is to be like Muhammad, the Hadiths are stories remembered by his wives and warriors. And they would say, I remember the Prophet said this. Well, I remember the Prophet said that. Now, the first generation of Muslims were all illiterate, and so it was all oral. The word Quran means recitation. And so these hadiths, these stories, would be passed down orally. And if you've read the hadiths, they would say, so-and-so said that he heard somebody say that he heard somebody say that he heard the prophet say. And then they would consider some more reliable than others, and then the Shiites would like some hadiths, and the Sunni would like some hadiths, and they didn't all have the same things. One of the interesting was Caliph Umar, and he would do things, and they would say, "Well, you can't do that," and he would say, "I remember one time the prophet and I were all by ourselves, and we were talking, and he told me this." And they're like, "Well, how can we question him because he was with the prophet?" And so there's the hadiths, and those were oral stories passed down about Muhammad. And then there's the Sirat, which is a biography of Muhammad, and it's written 100 years after his death, and it puts his life in chronological order. So Western minds like a timeline. And then you can zoom in and say, well, this is what happened. But then you can zoom out and you go to a different part of the timeline. And so if you're going to read anything first, I would recommend reading the Surat first before even the Quran.
Interesting.
But I wrote a book, and I would encourage you to read my book first. It's called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam and the United States. And my website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. So, and then there's rulings. There's 1,400 years of rulings of scholars interpreting the Quran, the Hadith, and the Surat. And there's 4 major schools, and some are a little more peaceful, and some are a little more violent. And then there's slavery. And so when you're fighting battles, you kill some people, but what do you do with the ones who surrender? Well, you keep some and you sell the rest. There's, when you read the Islamic history, it's sort of interesting how they word things. They would go into a village and they would kill the men. And then they would say, well, there's all these women and there was no one there to protect them. And so we divided the women up amongst our Muslim soldiers to take them under our protection. It's like, okay, you kill the husband and you take the wife, and you're trying to portray that as somehow being merciful, right? And then there was one where the chief of one of the cities, Khaybar, wouldn't tell where the treasure was hidden. So Muhammad had him stretched out on the ground, and they kindled a fire on his chest, and he still wouldn't tell where the treasure was. They beheaded him. And his wife was really beautiful. And so when they took all the captives, Muhammad put his shawl, his cape over her to signify that she was his. Isn't that romantic? Anyway, but then they also had white slaves. And so there were whole Catholic orders called the Trinitarians, and the head of the order was called the ransomer. And they would collect alms and donations and go under a white flag to ransom your friend back. One of Muhammad's wives was Mary, a Coptic Egyptian Christian that he had captured. And he had a night with each wife. And when he got this new wife, he was skipping the nights that he had with the other ones. And so they were going to organize a boycott. And he gets a verse from his Allah that says, "O consorts of the prophet, if any of you act unseemingly toward the prophet, it will be double punishment for her. And this is easy for Allah to do." And so they're like, okay, if he wants to change up the order. But she finally took the veil. So if you weren't taken, you weren't wearing the veil. But if you wore the veil, that meant that you belonged to somebody, that you were covered, that you were taken. And so when she finally came out one day and she was wearing the veil, that she now belonged to him. So, and then they had caravans, and they're robbing caravans. But then once they got on the Mediterranean, they had ships and they had pirates, and they would raid the coast of Italy. Whole Italian towns would leave the coast and move up into the mountains. They'd raid the coast of Spain. They would get rid of the church bells, and they would take thousands captive to North Africa. But it went on for centuries. And there was one set of Muslim pirates that went up to Ireland, and they came up at nighttime, and they went to a small Irish village called Baltimore, and they rounded up the whole town and put them on ships and sent them to Morocco and sold them into slavery. And so it's called the Stolen Village of Baltimore, Ireland. Then they had black slaves. Muhammad was a white Arab. There are hadiths that says he was the white man reclining on the couch, and he'd lift his arms to say a certain prayer, and they said they saw the whiteness of the prophet's underarms. Another hadith, a guy was on his donkey, it rubs up against Muhammad's donkey, and he says, I saw the whiteness of the prophet's thigh. And he owned black slaves like Bilal and others. And so they had slave markets in Timbuktu, Niger, where the canoe meets the caravan, and Tanzania and Khartoum and the Zanzibar coast, and lots of Muslim slave trading markets. And so when America was discovered, the greedy Spaniards enslaved Native Americans until a Catholic priest named Bartolome de las Casas, the Reformation, Bartolome de las Casas, pressured the King of Spain to stop the enslavement of Native Americans. And as good as that was, the greedy people said, where can we get more slaves? And someone said, Africa. And started the African slave trade to the Western Hemisphere. Now, there's two threads I trace through history: greed and the gospel. So you always have people motivated by greed, and they're the ones that sell people into slavery and take land from Indians and grow opium in India and ship it into China and vote for candidates that think they'll help their pocketbook, even though they stand for abortion. And then there are there are people that are motivated by the gospel. And they're the ones that go into these villages in Africa and start medical clinics and dig wells and give away shoes and do all this kind of stuff and risk their lives. So it's not a hardware problem, it's a software problem. It's not us trying to define which race is good and which race is bad. It's which software program, right? Your spirit-minded body, your mind is like a super fancy computer. It's more than that, but it's at least that. And your body's like the computer case, which makes it silly for people to argue over what color the computer case is. Imagine if I were to say green computers are better than blue computers. It's like, really doesn't matter what color the computer is. What matters is what software is on it. Doesn't matter what color somebody's iPhone is. What apps are on it. And so it doesn't matter what color somebody's skin is what behavioral software is running on their brain.
Heart.
Is it love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, walk the extra mile, or is it cancel them, get them to lose their job, retaliate? So the battle is who gets to load the software on the next generation. And they want to put malware and spyware and corrupted files on these little kids' brains. And it's our job to put God's word and God's love into their brains. Anyway, so we have this slave trade that these slaves were purchased at the Muslim slave markets and shipped to the New World. And then when the Turks would capture a Christian area, they would take the boys and traumatize them and then raise them either to be soldiers called janissaries, and they were not allowed to grow beards, just mustaches. They wore white hats in the battle, and they were trained to fight from the earliest times, and they were the most feared troops. And they had to call the Sultan their father. They were forbidden to marry, so there was a lot of sodomy. And so the cute little boys were called coquecs, and they were taken into battle, and it was called the sodomy of the Turks. And so I won't get into it any more than that. Now, you had David Livingstone was a missionary from Scotland to the Congo, and he wrote about the Muslim slave trade. And he said how he would go through a valley in the 1800s, and then a couple years later would go through the valley. It would be ghost villages. What happened to everybody? The Muslim slave traders came through. He said that you would, one time he stumbled across a line of them, and they were shackled together, being forced to march 500 miles to the coast to be sold into slavery. And if they walked too slow or they were injured, or they were hurt, they would just shoot them, tie them to a tree and let them die. He says that you could tell where the slave trails were by looking for the vultures circling. And so he writes in his journals, because he was also looking for the source of the Nile River. He said, more important than finding the source of the Nile, he says, if any of my revelations about this Arab Muslim slave trade can help stop this monster that hangs over Africa, then my life will be worth it, you know. And it still goes on today. There's slavery in Africa today, and a lot of this is in Muslim countries, Niger, Mauritania, Sudan. So we talked about the first spring of Arab expansion, of Islamic expansion, Arab Persian. And then toward the end of that, it gets a little moderate, and they conquer, and they're stopped after northern Spain, and then they're stopped from going into the Byzantine Empire. And we're talking 800s, 900s, the year 1000. And this period is called the Islamic Golden Age. And they begin to become more moderate. They weren't in a hurry to make the captured Christians convert, because it was the non-Muslim minorities that paid the taxes. Muslims did not pay the taxes. And so the non-Muslim communities, every family had to once a year ransom their life with a jizya tax. And if you didn't have money to pay, then you weren't part of the agreement, and they could take your wife and kids and sell you all into slavery. But they weren't in a hurry to make non-Muslims convert. And so during this time you had periods of moderation, and Muslim scholars would study Greek classics. And one was Al-Farabi, who lived 872 to 951, and he tried to incorporate Greek science and philosophy during Islam's Golden Age. Another is Avicenna. He was a Persian Muslim, and he wrote 450 works on philosophy, medicine, and math. And they were studying astronomy, and they were doing all kinds of stuff. Another is Averroes, and he was a philosopher in Andalusia, Spain. And he wrote on physics, music, geography, medicine, math. And he was like an expert on like Aristotle. And if you were to have taken a snapshot of the world, you would have thought that Islam was about to experience the Renaissance. They were getting more moderate. They were studying Greek stuff, but it all got slapped down by this guy, Ghazali. He's considered the most influential Muslim after Muhammad. He's called the Mujahideen, or a renewer of the faith. And he said, stop studying Greek stuff. Because if you study Greek geometry, you could get into Greek philosophy and be pulled away from Islam. So just study the Quran and nothing else. He writes, one should restrain anyone who would immerse himself in these mathematical sciences, for even though they do not pertain to the domain of religion, yet since they are among the foundations of the philosopher's sciences, the student will be infected with the evil and corruption of the philosophers. So don't study Greek geometry. And so this was a closing of the Arab Persian mind. And at the same time in Europe, you had St. Thomas Aquinas, and he had his scholasticism and the studying. And this was an opening of the Western mind, sort of coming out of superstition in the Middle Ages. And he would say it's okay to read Greek stuff and Aristotle and Plato. You just be smart as a cow, eat the hay and spit out the sticks. You take the truth and just ignore the pagan stuff. So, like a broken clock is right twice a day. That even a pagan can stumble across truth, and truth is truth, irregardless if a pagan stumbled across it. And so Thomas Aquinas helped open up the Western Christian mind to studying Greek stuff, and Ghazali closed the Arabic mind. And so you had universities start in churches, in monasteries, in Bologna, Paris, Naples, Toulouse, Oxford. And so now the West is opening up and studying, and And then the Renaissance happens, and the West experiences the Renaissance. So around this time is what's called the Crusades. And this is the Turkish Spring, 1071 to 1923. Now, a little background. The biggest religion in the world is Christianity, about a third of the world. The second biggest religion in the world is Islam, about a quarter of the world, followed by unaffiliated, 15% Hindu, 7% Buddhist, 5.9% folk religion, and then down to 0.2% Jew. And so let's compare the founders of the two largest religions in the world. And why is this important? Because if you want to compare Christianity and Islam, you're going to have people saying, well, the Pope had armies and the Pope fought and killed people. And it gets a little bit hard to see the differences. But if you compare the founders,
come on,
Jesus never killed anybody.
Right.
Muhammad killed an estimated 3,000 people. Jesus never led armies. Muhammad led armies. Jesus never owned slaves. Muhammad owned slaves. Jesus never married. Muhammad had anywhere from 11 to 22 wives, with Aisha being the youngest. Jesus never tortured anyone. Muhammad tortured that chief of Khaybar because he wouldn't tell where the treasure was hidden. Jesus did not lie. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He said, Satan's the father of liars. And Muhammad permitted lying. It is called taqiyya, sacred lying, holy deceit. You're permitted to lie if you feel threatened. And that's a pretty broad definition. So Muhammad was feeling threatened by a neighboring chieftain who was planning on attacking him. And he said to his warriors, who will rid me of this chieftain? And one warrior said, I will, if you permit me to lie. He says, go. So he goes to the chieftain and says, I've left Muhammad. I want to help you, but they're after me. And the chieftain says, okay, you can spend the night in my tent. You'll have my whole army surrounding and protecting you. Well, in the middle of the night, he tiptoes over and beheads the chieftain, grabs his head, runs out of camp, runs all the way to Muhammad, gives Muhammad the head, and says, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad said, no, Allah's face is shown upon you. And Muhammad gave him his staff and said, you can lean on this in the day of judgment, because on that day, many people won't have anything to lean upon. So Muhammad gave his approval to lying to your enemy so you could sneak inside of their camp so you could do a terrorist attack.
Right.
And so this concept of sneaking into other countries and pretending like you're peaceful, but then just biding time so you can do a terrorist attack. And as I mentioned, slavery. Jesus never forced anyone to follow him.
Exactly right, Bill. Exactly right.
And, one time he had people following him for a free lunch. And it's almost like he said something difficult on purpose to shake away those following him for the wrong reasons, right? Multiplied loaves and fishes, and they're coming at us, and they said, how'd you get across the lake? And he goes, you're following me because you of the bread. You want some more bread? I'm the bread of life. Unless you eat my body, drink blood, you have no part in me. And they're like, oh, this is a difficult saying. Who can bear it? And they walked with him no more. They wanted to make him king, and Jesus knew this was not the way it was supposed to happen according to his father's plan. And so he intentionally was shaking away those following him for materialistic reasons. And he didn't run after him. It says, oh, you misunderstood me, come back. No, he turns to the 12 and says, you want to go too? There's the door. And Peter says, where else can I go? You're the only one with the words of eternal life. It's almost as if Jesus was wanting to shake away those following him for the wrong reasons. But Muhammad said, whoever changes his Islamic religion, kill him. So you're free to join Islam. You just can't leave. Sort of like Hotel California, Here is Egyptian Imam Yusuf Qarada. He said, if they had gotten rid of the apostasy punishment, which means they kill you if you leave Islam, Islam wouldn't exist today. Islam would have ended since the death of the Prophet. Opposing apostasy is what kept Islam to this day. Ibn Masud's hadith, that's one of those hadiths, says, kill these three criminals, the adulterer, the murderer, and the apostate that leaves our community. So it's a community religion. You join it, you get emotional support. You leave it, they'll gang up on you and kill you.
Wow.
It's sort of like the Bloods and the Crips, right? You join the gang, you get the brotherhood, you get to partake in the booty. You leave the gang itself will team up and kill you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jesus forgave insults. He's on the cross, they're insulting him, and he says, Father, forgive him. Muhammad avenged insults. And so there was a guy in Mecca who made up poems making fun of Muhammad. He had two slave girls reciting the poems. Muhammad was insulted by the poems. So in 630 AD, when Muhammad conquers Mecca, he pulls out a list of 10 people to be killed. And it included this guy who made up the poems and the slave girls who recited them. So the idea of if you insult the prophet, you get killed goes all the way back to the prophet himself. Jesus did not permit his disciples to rape anyone. Duh. Muhammad did. And there's always hadiths that talk about how to do it. I won't get into all that. None of the apostles were governors or generals. Jesus wasn't a governor or a general. Every one of the caliphs was a governor and a general. Jesus taught God was our Father. In Islam, it's blasphemy to call Allah your father, because Allah took no wife and has no son. Jesus taught we're children of God. In Islam, Allah has no children. Jesus taught we're made in the image of God. In Islam, Allah has no image. Jesus taught to have a personal relationship with God. In Islam, it's blasphemy to even want a personal relationship with Allah. He is transcendent and unknowable. Even in the next life, you will never meet him. He's forever unknowable. Yet Jesus said, and this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. So Jesus says eternal life is knowing God, and Muhammad is, you never will know Allah. The first 3 centuries of Christianity, there are 10 major persecutions, and Christians never led an armed resistance to the Roman emperor. The first 3 centuries of Islam, they conquer from Arabia to Paris, right? The Battle of Tours. And then another comparison is voluntary versus involuntary. Jesus says if you go to a town and you present your message, if they do not receive you, then just leave, shake the dust from your feet and leave. Muhammad's go to a town, present your message. If they don't receive you, wage war on the town. Now, one verse that is very important, a friend of mine has a ministry and he ministers to Muslims, and he says this is the one verse that they have no counter for, and he's used this, and God has touched the hearts of Muslims, and many of them have become Christian. And it's Isaiah 61, and of course Jesus quotes this in the book of Luke. It says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted. There is no concept in all of Islam that Allah wants to heal your broken heart. Allah could care less about your heart. Allah demands submission. He demands obedience. He doesn't care about your heart, but the God of the Bible does. And so I've ministered to people, and when you say that let me pray for you, God cares about you. He wants to heal your heart. They'll experience the love of God, and many times they'll come to tears. And so you had the Muslims, the warriors. They had conquered all of North Africa. They conquered into Spain, and they conquered into the Byzantine Empire, and then they had the Islamic Golden Age, and they became a little more moderate. And then around this time, Western Europe has Vikings. They had boats with low keels that they could go up every river in Europe. You could be hundreds of miles away from the coast, and there would be dozens of these Viking boats just land, and they would get out and they would just start killing and pillaging and throwing the women over their shoulder and riding back to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And then while they're on their next raid, the captured Christian women would have to raise their Viking little boys while the husband's off doing more raiding, and they would raise these little boys to be Christian. And so after a couple of generations, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark became Christian. And so these Christian Vikings were called Norsemen or Normans. And so you have Normandy is where they conquered into central France. William,
Yeah.
William the Norman was a Christian Viking that conquered England. But then you had Richard the Norman, and he went all the way down and he captured southern Italy, took it away from the Muslims, and Sicily took it away from the Muslims. And so it's years ago I went to Constantinople or Istanbul, and we went into the Hagia Sophia, and it's 165 feet high, big dome, 102-foot across dome, 4 acres of gold mosaics. Most of them are covered with whitewash and Quran verses, but it was the biggest church in the world for 1,000 years. But if you go to the second floor balcony, it has a plexiglass over the marble balcony, because with underneath the plexiglass, there's all this graffiti carved in it. And there's some of the graffiti that are these square letters, like, boxy squares, like, a C and and then underneath this has a description, and it says this is Viking graffiti. In other words, they put Olaf was here. And so they, around the year 900, with year 1000 or so, you had Vikings there in raiding Constantinople. And again, here's the Normans, and so they had the different areas. And so it took 700 years to drive the Muslims out of Spain. It's called the Reconquista. One of the people was El Cid, and he helped drive the Muslims out of Spain. And Charlton Heston starred in the movie. And I met Charlton Heston. He endorsed me when I ran for Congress years ago. He was the head of the NRA. But the movie El Cid, so the Spaniards were fighting to drive the Muslims out of Spain. And in this particular area, El Cid was very successful, but he was wounded and he was dying. And he knew they needed one more charge and they would win the battle. And so he had him tie his body to the horse and strap him on and open the castle doors and slap the horse. And he goes off riding. And then all the soldiers see, well, there's El Cid. And they get off and they ride to it and they fight and they win. And then after the victory, there's like, where's El Cid? And he's over there sort of drooped in his saddle. It's one of those romantic movies that you can watch with your honey. And so they had 700 years, drive the Muslims out of Spain. And then the Turks, 2 waves, Seljuk Turks and then the Ottoman Turks. The Seljuk Turks invade the Byzantine Empire. So all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation are wiped out by the Turks.
Wow.
Ephesus, Sardis, Pergamum, Thyatira, Smyrna, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And the most popular Greek saint was Saint Nicholas, and he lived during Roman times, gave to the poor, throw money in the window of poor people. But when the Muslims attacked, they moved his grave over to Italy. And the Pope that dedicated the grave was Urban II. And he's the same Pope that goes to the Council of Clermont and begs these Europeans to send help to the Greeks. So set aside your Catholic, Greek Orthodox differences and go over there and help them. And they do. It is called the First Crusade. And so there's 9 major crusades. And Richard the Lionheart led the 3rd crusade. And actually, Frederick of Barbarossa was leading it, which means Redbeard. He was German, and he was 60 years old and crossing through a river in Turkey. His horse bucked. He fell off in his armor and drowned in 2 feet of water because he had all this armor on. He couldn't get out of the water. Everybody else was on their horses and they couldn't get off fast enough to pull him out. And anyway, so the Germans pick up and go back to Germany, and so that leaves Richard in charge. But the other person is Philip of France, and Richard was not somebody that was. It was one of these prideful things that, I want to get the victory and I want to go home and say that I won the battle, and the other one's like, no, no, I want the victory, and um, Philip one day just picks up and sails back to France. And so then Richard has to finish up the crusade on his own, makes a deal with Saladin. And anyway, then St. Louis led the Seventh and Eighth Crusades against the Muslims. And when the Crusades end, the Islamic world is quite large. It controls all the Middle East, over to northern India, over to Eastern Europe, Spain, all in North Africa, down the Zanzibar coast to Madagascar, over to Indonesia. And so then they begin to invade Europe, Battle of Kosovo. And meanwhile, there's a Muslim leader across Central Asia named Tamerlane, and he kills 17 million. He told his men to come back with a skull in every hand, and he left towers of skulls. And he actually said, "Where are the infidels that I may kill them?" And somebody said, "There's a lot of infidels in India." He goes, "Great, let's go to India just for the purpose of killing infidels." I mean, and
Let me
anyway.
ask you this, Bill, and I want you to sort of bring it more to the modern. We got about 15 minutes here, but I want to ask you a question about this violence, because what I've seen so far in all of this, and what I'm trying to establish, and I think you've done an outstanding job as you always have, this religion, either whether it's been having to be uprooted out of Europe, or whether, like you just described, you have one man that's responsible for the death of 17 million. They don't care how many they kill. I mean, to them, the infidel, 17 million to them is nothing. Is this the same bloodthirstiness that exists in modern Islam, just like it existed then? Because it seems to me that nothing's really changed, has it?
Yeah, so you have human nature, and normally human nature wants to get along. But you have this software program called Sharia Islam, fundamentalist Islam. The term is used as Islamist, and it's the fundamental ones. And they have a religious fervor to kill. And again, they're just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. And people would say, well, why don't all the moderate ones stand up? It's like they would if the non-Muslim world would show itself strong. And so if a gang is taking over your neighborhood and you see them doing a drug deal on your front lawn, you call the police. The police show up, drive off the drug dealer. The police come to your door and says, "Thank you, we're here for you, call anytime." And so you'll stand up, you'll get your neighbors to stand up. But if you call the police and they don't show up, and then the drug dealer comes to your door and says, "We have somebody on the inside of the police department, and they told us that you called and snitched on us. If you do it again, we'll kill you."
Wow.
Are you going to stand up anymore?
Good.
And so when you have the non-Muslim world caving, showing weakness, the moderate Muslim is between a rock and a hard place. It's like they would prefer to stand up, but if you're not going to come to their rescue, then they don't want to get killed, and so they'll keep their heads low, and the fundamental ones will take the upper hand. Well, I probably won't get a chance to come to the present because there's so much more in between.
Yeah.
But I can come back for
We'll come back part 3. We'll do part 3 with the present. Keep going with this part, and we'll ask a few general questions, and I'll schedule you again for the modern, because I really wanted to him. This is good stuff, because I think it's good for people to see the history of where this movement has come and the efforts that has cost the lives of millions of people to try to get it outrooted in Europe and other parts of the world. Keep going.
So the Turks, you had the Seljuk Turks and then the Ottoman Turks, and they were invading into the Byzantine Empire, today is called Turkey. And they would take one village, and then they would, a couple of years later, they'd take another one. A couple of years later, they'd take it. And it sort of happened so slow that the great Byzantine Empire didn't notice it. It was sort of like you maybe grew up in a downtown in a big city, but now it's a little dangerous, and you don't go back to that old neighborhood again. And you more or less in your mind, you sort of check it off. You say, okay, I'm not going to go back there. And then another neighborhood starts to get taken over. And you're like, okay, I guess I'm not going to go into that neighborhood. And then another neighborhood, until pretty soon they've taken over the whole city. And you're like, well, I'm not going to go downtown anymore. Right. And it happens slow, so you don't notice. Well, that's the way that the Turks were taking over the Byzantine Empire. They take over a province here, a little area there. And so the Black Sea empties into the Mediterranean Sea, and that's where Constantinople was. Today, it's Istanbul. It's a city of over 20 million people. It is a big city, even back then. And so as that land was taken, the Byzantines still had their navy, and they still could sort of more or less go where they wanted. But then you had politics. And inside of Constantinople, you had parties. There was like the blue party and the green party, and they would like fight, and they would, it was the Democrats and Republicans. And so there was a emperor named John Paleologus, and he had two sons, Constantine the 11th and Demetrius. And Demetrius thought he should have been chosen to be the emperor, but Constantine the 11th was. And so Demetrius, he sees this Democrat and Republican, this party. He goes over to the Muslims and says, hey, help me against my brother. And he brings them across the Bosphorus, brings them up to the walls of Constantinople, and they wage war on Constantinople and on Constantine the 11th. And the Muslim warriors are like, you know what? We can wage war against Constantinople without this Demetrius guy. And they do. And they wage war. And after enormous sieges, they finally win. And it is 1453. It's Sultan Mehmed II. He's only in his early 20s, but he's the Sultan, and he conquers. They even had a Venetian cannon maker, and he offered his services to Constantinople, but they couldn't afford to pay him. And so he goes to the Sultan and says, I'll help you make what was the biggest cannon in the world at the time. It could shoot a 1,200-pound cannonball over a mile. And they're smashing this into the walls of Constantinople. Boom, boom, boom. And finally, Constantinople falls in 1453. And this cuts off the land trade routes from Europe to India and China. They take the largest Christian church in the world. I mean, this was like bigger than the Vatican for 1,000 years. But it's turned into a mosque. And then trade routes. So Marco Polo went from Venice, Italy to China in the 1200s. And he brings back spaghetti noodles, gunpowder, a compass, a wheelbarrow, a piñata. The Chinese invented, paper currency, all kinds of stuff. He wrote it in his book called that was nicknamed Il Miliones, but it's the travels of Marco Polo. But when the Muslims conquered Constantinople, it ended the land trade routes. And the year Constantinople fell was 1453. And so that is when Columbus set sail looking for a sea route. So Columbus would have never set sail over here if it had not been for Islamic jihad over there.
Interesting. I did not know that. That's an interesting fact of history. Go ahead.
And Columbus thought he made it to India. So he names the people he met Indians. And the name stuck. Think of it, we never would have called Native Americans Indians had it not been for Islamic jihad. Right? Columbus gave him the name because he thought he was in India. Why was Columbus trying to get to India in 1492? Because the Muslims conquered Constantinople in 1453, cutting off the land routes to India. And so everybody that hates Columbus, every Columbus Day, they're like, oh, we hate Columbus. It's like, well, you need to turn one chapter back in your history book and see the reason Columbus set sail in the first place was Islamic jihad. Now, as the Muslims were invading Greece, the Greek scholars fled with their Greek art and architecture and literature, and they flooded into Florence, and this is called the Renaissance, the rebirth of Greek literature and so forth. But they also fled with their Greek New Testaments. And so this is when Erasmus translates the Greek New Testament into Latin, and this helps lay the foundation for the Reformation. And so we may not have had a Reformation ended up in for Islam conquering into Greece and them fleeing with their Greek scriptures. And Martin Luther starts the Reformation in 1517. 1529, 100,000 Muslims surround Vienna, Austria, under Suleiman the Magnificent. And he wanted to conquer the world. I mean, he had North Africa, he had a navy, he had ships in the Persian Gulf, he had, he rebuilt the walls in Jerusalem. I mean, he was powerful. And so he lays siege to Vienna, but the weather gets freezing cold and his camels slip on the muddy roads and breaks their legs. And anyway, then he has a challenge to his throne and he has to go back and kill some relative. And so Vienna survived. Martin Luther says, the Turk is the rod of the wrath of the Lord our God. If the Turk's God, the devil, is not beaten first, there is reason to fear the Turk will not be so easy to beat. The fight against the Turks must begin with repentance. We must reform our lives, or we shall fight in vain. Our sins and ingratitude have earned God's wrath and disfavor, so he justly gives us into the hands of the devil and the Turk. And so this was Deuteronomy 28. If you hearken to the voice of the Lord, you'll be blessed. If you don't hearken, it says the stranger will come in amongst you and rise up above you, and they will be the head and you'll be the tail. There's politics where the king of Spain captures the king of France. Francis the First. And after some concessions, he lets Francis the First go. Francis the First immediately makes a treaty with Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent against Spain. And the Europeans consider this a deal with the devil, that how could he go so low as to make a deal with the Turks? And so now Spain has to fight the French and the Turks. And so this is when the Turks can invade Hungary and kill their leader and conquer into Eastern Europe, because Spain doesn't have enough army to fight both. But that Franco-Ottoman treaty went on for 3 centuries. And France was always on the side upgrading the Turkish military. When the French Revolution happened, Napoleon was an artillery officer. He was a genius at artillery. And he was ordered to go to the Turks and train them how to use artillery, which is cannons on wheels. And Napoleon refused, and he resigned from the military. And some people pulled strings, got him back in, but he refused to go to upgrade the Turks. And then Napoleon eventually had all of his battles and so forth. But imagine if Napoleon's military genius had been in the hands of the Ottoman Empire.
Europe would be different today. It would have rewrote European history.
So, and then the Queen Elizabeth, she was fighting Spain. Remember the Spanish Armada?
Yes.
And so she sends ambassadors to the Ottoman Empire and to Morocco. And she makes treaties with the Muslims. And the Muslims are like, we feel like we have something in common with the Protestants because we both don't like the Catholic Church with all of its idol statues. And so it's interesting. We always think of it as, 2 sides, but it's actually like a Chinese checker game. There's multiple sides that are always going on. John Calvin writes, I hear the sad condition of your Germany. The Turk again prepares to wage war with a larger force, who will stand up and oppose his marching throughout the land at his mere will and pleasure. John Wesley later writes, ever since the religion of Islam appeared in the world, espousers of it have been as wolves and tigers to all other nations, rending and tearing all that fell into their merciless paws. Thomas Aquinas in 1258 wrote, Muhammad seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasure. Those who believed in him were brutal men and desert wanderers. Muhammad forced others to become his followers by the violence of his arms. And there's the Franco-Ottoman Alliance, 1536. And Sultan Suleiman, sworn enemy of the Christian faith. And so Sultan Suleiman controlled this whole huge area that used to be Christian. And Spain is the one trying to stop it. If it wasn't for all the gold from the New World that kept giving the King of Spain money so that he could continue his fight, then probably he would have not been successful. And so they're two most powerful kings in the world. So the King of Spain tried to stop the Reformation and tried to stop the Turks, and finally realized he could not do both. And so he makes a deal with the Protestants in 1555 called the Peace of Augsburg that basically says, believe whatever you want in your kingdom. Let's just work together against the Turks. And so this was a big plus for the Reformation. They now were officially recognized.
Wow.
And so then the Reformation spread. So had the Turkish invasion not been so serious, the King of Spain would have continued to fight the Turks and fight the Protestants. But because he had to make a choice, because the Muslims were so powerful, he did this Peace of Augsburg, recognizing Protestants. And anyway, I think maybe that's enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to bring it to an end right. I want you to just keep your marker right there. A couple of quick questions. How close did civilization come to falling to Islam overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most dangerous? Where would you say that this religion came, Bill, to basically dominating the world? Because it still wants to dominate the world today. I mean, you look at that map, that's what Islam's been wanting to do from its inception. Has there been a point in history that it came so close that if it had not been for the courageous efforts of King Charles, and other things that stood up against Sultan, I mean, we could very well be speaking Farsi or Islamic languages, could we not?
Yeah. Matter of fact, there was one Moroccan sultan that wanted to send some ships to the New World so he could colonize, but he was in a number of battles and he couldn't get it together. So that would have been an interesting chapter in history. No, there's been a dozen times. Charles Martel that stopped him in 732 AD. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571. Lots of different battles that if they had lost, then Europe would have been conquered. So, but all this is in a book. The title of the book is What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. And my website is AmericanMinute.com.
One final question, quick question. And I'm going to have you back on part 3 because I want to bring this into our modern time with what happened on October the 7th. Scale of 1 to 10, Bill Federer's opinion. How dangerous is this religion today?
Well, like I mentioned with the triangle of the France and England and so forth, making treaties with the Turks against, Spain and everything. Right now, you have this triangle more or less, and you have enemies of America, and I would consider globalists as the main enemy, more so than Russia, more so than China. I think you look at Larry Fink and BlackRock. They said by 2028 he'll own everything in the world. Wow. I mean, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars, and he decides where it goes. And all you got to do is say, okay, I'm going to invest in this. And so that goes up. And then he says, I'm going to not invest in that anymore. And he pulls trillions of dollars out. Guess what? It's going to collapse. Then he can come back in and buy up everything dirt cheap. I mean, but that, and so the people on that globalist, they view Islam as something that they can control. And so they think they're using it as a destabilizing force for their globalism. Now, the Muslims, from their point of view, they view these globalists as fools. And so there's no honor among thieves. They each think they're using each other. There's a verse in the book of Revelation that says the woman rides the beast, and then later the beast tears the flesh off the woman, right? And so
we actually talked about that this morning in our Bible study, so that's apropos that you would say that. Listen, buddy, I know we're out of time. Please, I'll get with you. Don't go nowhere. Let me say goodbye to these folks, and I'm going to get with you on a date. Thank you for being with me tonight. This has been good. I always enjoy these history lessons, and I think that if we take anything away from this, this has been a blood-soaked religion, and they have sought to dominate the world, and they're still seeking to dominate the world. And we'll deal with that more in our next week, because I do want to bring a more modern flavor to it in our next lesson. Folks, we'll be right back. I want to thank Bill Federer. AmericanMinute.com is his website. Go to their website. Get that book, What Every American Needs to Know About Islam. I encourage you to get it. I'm going to get my copy, and I want you to get yours. We'll be right back. Bill, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, it's whatever.
All righty, and we want to thank Bill Federer for being with us tonight, and we're grateful that he had. I know it was a long interview, a lot of history there, and so forth, but it was good. It was good. I wanted you to get this. I hope people will go back and listen to the replay. At the end, I misspoke. It's not what every American needs to know about Islam. It's the Quran, and there's a reason why that's important. Bill was telling me after the show that the Muslims actually found out about his book. It's no joke. They found out about his book. They went out and they made a book entitled What Every American Needs to Know About Islam, and where Bill sounds the warning about its danger. Their book basically tries to convince Americans that Islam's a religion of peace. I want to make it clear, I always do this when we have these interviews about Islam, and Bill's probably the best expert I've ever had on this network about it. We do not disparage, nor do we hate Muslims. We've never hated Muslims. We never will hate a Muslim. We love the Muslim people. They are under such deception, just like a lot of folks are under deception tonight. There's something about this deception with Islam that carries a very violent tenor to it, and it's militant, very similar to the LGBTQ community in some ways. Not every LGBTQ person is militant, but there is a spirit over that movement in general that is not tolerant of other folks' lifestyle. They preach tolerance. They want us to be tolerant of their lifestyle, but it's not sort of reciprocated. Same way with Islam. I've studied Islam through the years, and I have tried to come to some kind of reconciliation in my mind where all of this fits into Bible prophecy, because I know several things are going to happen. If you've been with us on our morning Bible studies, and be with us in the morning, because we'll probably will address this a little bit, because we were beginning to talk about this image that John saw in Revelation 17 of this woman sitting on a beast, a scarlet-colored beast, having 7 heads, 10 horns, which is basically the empires of the past, present, and future, of which these religions, these false religions, this woman typified all false religion on the earth, Islam being one of them, Catholicism, Buddhism, any false religion outside the cross. And there's a lot of Protestant sects of this that are included in that. It's not just a Catholic thing. It's not just an Islam thing. It's not any one movement. It is a potpourri of all false religion. She sats on many people. Islam has sat on millions throughout its history. Catholicism has too, and sad to say, Protestantism has as well. I'm not so sure which is worse, to be frank with you. But we want to make it clear, we are praying. We pray every day for the world to be saved. We pray for the Lord to save as many lost as He can through the efforts of the gospel teaching, preaching of the gospel. This network is doing everything we humanly can to do that. We're not a big network. We have to depend on the donations and the help of the people out here. We survive on it, and whatever we get in, we share whatever is over and above what we have with those in need to hear the gospel. And we do a lot of outreach just through the show itself. Folks, this network is on the air 6 days a week, and not too many networks can say that. A lot of folks are on once a week, maybe twice a week, once every other week. We stay on the air pretty much every night of the week, and there's some weeks we're on here 7 nights a week straight. And if you count the face shows, we're putting out almost 10 to 15 shows a week, to be frank. And yes, there's a news side. Yes, there's a face side. But our overarching effort is always outreach. It's always to speak truth and to encourage people to draw closer to Christ and to come into the understanding of the times that we're in. We're in the last days. I've always tried to reconcile Islam into this picture. And at some point, and it may be in South Dakota, we're going to be talking in one of the prophecy conferences about the reconciliation that's going to take place between the sons of Egypt, the sons of Israel, and the sons of Assyria. And it has to do with Abraham's 3 wives. And I don't want to get into that tonight because we'd be here till 11 o'clock. But join us in the Bible studies because that is going to come up soon. But I will tell you this. When God deals with Israel during the Great Tribulation, he's also going to deal with the Muslim world. There's a revival coming to the Muslims. They don't know it. They don't care for it right now. They don't believe in the God of heaven. As you heard Bill, it was very intriguing. They have no hope for the afterlife. Their hope for the afterlife, they don't have any desire or inclination they will see their God face to face. We as Christians do. Christ is the Son, but God the Father He's a spirit. We're going to see God when we go to heaven. And we will meet God, our Heavenly Father. That's the hope that all Christians have. It's a blessed hope. Pi just called it the blessed hope, looking for the glorious appearing of our God and Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. When you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. When you see the Father, you've seen Christ. And it's sad to me to listen when I hear the history of Islam, and there's this always conundrum with me because there's always this conflict in my heart because we don't want to basically sound like we're just making Islam out, the Muslim, I'm trying to rephrase this, we're not trying to make Muslim people out to be evil, but yet we have to warn our nation that this religion is dangerous. Let me tell you this, all religion is dangerous tonight. All religion is dangerous. I said it this morning, I'll say it tonight on our Tuesday night show. The blood of millions, I would change that to billions of people, that has been shed in battlefields, that has been shed in warfare, that has been shed in inquisitions, that has been shed by Catholic churches and Catholic hierarchy, that has been shed by Muslim caliphates, that has been shed by Protestant denominations. And where Protestants may not burn people at the stake, even though Martin Luther got pretty ugly about the Jews, he tried to burn their synagogues down. Religion has always been an ugly feature on the earth that has generated violence and has done nothing but kill people. And the Protestants, we have a different way of killing people. It's with our mouth instead of with a sword. Islam does it with the sword. Catholics do it a certain way. Protestants do it their way. But ultimately, religion, all it does is condemn and kill. From the day that Cain took that fruit from his hands and he threw it at the feet of God and said, "This is my offering," Abel, his brother, recognized that the way to God was not through the works of his own hands, but through the blood of an innocent victim. And he goes out and he gets the best lamb he can find, slits its throat, and he pours that blood on the ground, and he kneels before God at that altar. And without saying a word, Abel declared himself a sinner. And he said, "I can't save myself." and God accepted Abel's sacrifice. He rejected the works of Cain. Cain got angry. He went out and he slew his brother. Man has been slaying his brother over religion ever since. Ever since. So it's not just Islam. So we fight this battle in our own hearts sometimes. We don't want to come across as making it seem like we hate Muslims, because we do not. It's, if we do anything in these programs, it's really, we're hoping that maybe something will click in them, that this religion that they're a part of is not leading them to the true God. But I want to warn the Christian community something about this tonight, folks. Apostate Christianity is not leading people to the true God either. When you get down to it, this woman that sits on this beast in Revelation 17, she represents all false religion. And there are millions, billions of people. Do you realize, folks, that out of the 6 billion people that's on this planet, 7 billion, that probably 5/7 of the people on this earth, I would likely say 8/10, maybe even 8.5 of the people, maybe 9/10 even, they're under the control of false religion. If Jesus came back right now, if Jesus came back and settled the books, do you realize that nearly 6 billion people on this earth, maybe 5 billion, would automatically, and I hate to say this, and I'm not saying this in glee, it's just the reality of where we're at, folks. 5 to 6 billion people would probably perish in unbelief based upon lies of false religion. That's how dangerous this spirit is on the earth. And if you listen to this history lesson tonight, this religion has been soaked in blood. And the conquest that it has sought to further, and its expansion has been one that has been wrought with great bloodshed. And it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop until it is stopped, really. First of all, there's every evidence the Antichrist himself will stop it, because the 10 kings are going to burn this whore with flesh, this great whore of Revelation 17. It sits on the earth, and the kings of the earth are going to burn her body with fire, literally. And it's speaking of the spirit. It's going to destroy organized religion. What's going to happen is that the Antichrist will declare all religion illegal at that point, in the midpoint of the tribulation, and the world will be forced to worship him and him alone. Now, if he's a Muslim, that is a theory that Islam will be the predominant religion during the Great Tribulation, and there's a lot of things. We talked about it in Waveland on Saturday night, and we hope that you get a chance to listen to those conferences. We've got them uploaded on our Faith Network. But a lot of things about Islam are very similar, very, very, very similar to what the Islamic religion believes, and Bill alluded to it as well, and there's an outline that we're going to have on the website in the next day or two. We're working on the website tonight, actually. We've got some stuff already uploaded. If you go there and click on End Time Conferences, you'll see that we've got handouts, some of the handouts already uploaded. But they are looking for a man named the Mahdi, the El Mahdi. I just call him the Mahdi because I'm the South and I don't speak Arabic. I just call him the Mahdi. But if you read what Islam believes about this Mahdi figure, it's the same almost exact thing that we Christians believe about the Antichrist, with one exception. We as Christians understand the Antichrist is not going to succeed in his bid for world domination. We understand that if we read the Bible. The Muslims don't believe that. The Muslims are all in on the fact that this Mahdi is going to make the world bow down in full submission to Islam at some point. And folks, there's no doubt in my mind that this Antichrist that is coming, he is going to have traits of Islam in him. Now, I don't know if he's going to be a raging Muslim himself. That is being argued back and forth, and Chris is out of arguing. I've got no strength to argue. I mean, ultimately, we don't know, and it is, for the child of God, it don't matter. But in a way it does, because the spirit of this coming man of sin is on the earth. And if you can understand what we're up against, it helps us pray for the Muslim people. It helps us pray for them. And as I sit here and think about it tonight, I get almost emotional about it, because I know that this spirit, it's not only a violent spirit, it's a deceptive spirit. There's such a blindness. The Muslims are blind to the true God, just like the Jews are blind to their true Savior. And Christians, there are so many Christians that are blind as well. In apostate Christianity, they're blind to the true gospel. And they're believing a false gospel tonight, and their souls are being damned to hell by doing it. We don't glee in that. We don't take pleasure in that. We don't get a kick out of saying that. As I've watched some people do sometimes, almost like they get a kick at telling everybody's going to go to hell. It's almost like they have a glee in their eye and a splint in their eye when they say it. I don't do that. Good God Almighty, help us. Good Lord, help us in the church. Help us in the church. I'm going to say this. I got about 6 minutes. The fastest growing religion on this earth right now is Islam. It's not Christianity. There are, I had the figure wrote down, in Africa alone, in the last 5 years, there have been over 10 million people that were once Christians that renounced their faith and they went to Islam. Now, there's a variety of reasons for that, and some of it is deception, but I'm going to tell you what a lot of it is. Not all of it, but some of it, they've been turned off by our brand of Christianity in the West. They have been turned off by the self-righteous bigotry and hatred and division of the American church, and the American version of Christianity has made the world puke. And that should make us all take a look in the mirror tonight at what kind of faith that we're exhibiting to our fellow man. They're watching us. People are watching, and they're basing their decisions for eternity by what they see, how we treat and how we do each other on this side of the ocean. 10 million people is a lot of folks. That's a lot of folks. I got no doubt that figure ain't correct. When I read it, I sort of said, whoa. But that's a lot of people that just in the last 5 years have turned to that faith. If you call it faith, it's not faith. It's a violent religion. So please understand tonight, as we do these shows on Islam, we're not in any way, shape, form, or fashion condemning Muslims. I don't know if there's a Muslim listening to me tonight that has come across this network. I just want you to know we love you. Your book does not have the word love in it. There's no hope in your book for the afterlife. There's no hope that you'll see your God. We serve a God that loves you. And he died for you. And he sent his son, Jesus Christ, who's not a prophet. He's more than a prophet. He's more than what you have been told. Your religion teaches that Muhammad is higher than Jesus Christ, and that's not so. Jesus Christ is the one that created Muhammad. He created him because God the Father is the creator, not Allah. But the day is going to come that we all stand before the God of heaven, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He loves you supremely. He does. We apologize here in the West for how we have exhibited hatred, and we have exhibited behaviors that are not becoming of our Savior, because he gave the ultimate price for us all. But don't let our example keep you from knowing that there's a God in heaven that loves you tonight, and he cares for you. And I do too. I wouldn't be doing these programs if I didn't. There is a part of this that we must face, though. It is a dangerous religion. It is a religion of violence. And we in the West had better wake up to that, because it's trying to infiltrate and take over this nation. It's trying to take over America. And it's really trying to take over the whole world, and it's not going to stop until it does. It will be stopped, but it's going to definitely try to take over the entire world with a sword. And that's my final thought tonight. Listen, we love you tonight. We hope you've had a good night with us. We've had 2 great shows on this Tuesday night. Tomorrow, not sure what we're going to be doing. I know we got a faith show tomorrow night. We're going to be dealing with the synagogue of Satan. Now, we're coming up on Easter. You're going to see us a lot this week, so don't think that you're going to get off easy. we got we got a lot of shows to go because we got Easter coming up this weekend. We got a Good Friday service. It'll be a special faith service. Probably won't be a regular McFiles show Friday because it's Good Friday. A sunrise service Sunday morning. And we've got an Easter celebration service Sunday at a regular time at 10. And then tomorrow night, if we don't do the Synagogue of Satan teaching with the Church of Philadelphia, we're going to do a special presentation on Easter, some kind of, I don't know what we're doing. We'll have a faith show tomorrow night. So please be with us for that. And Thursday night, I've got to entertain a grandson of mine, and we'll be on, but it'll be late. James Akers is sort of warming up in the bullpen. He sent me a text tonight, and he's got some information about the the Baltimore, the Baltimore Bridge. I'm sorry. I got you Brooklyn people on my heart tonight. The Baltimore Bridge situation, and we may get him on late Thursday. Eric Caron's out of the country. I was going to have Eric on. He'll be on soon. Brad Johnson will be back this month. We got 2 wonderful guests coming up in April. Christopher Hall will be back with me. Troy Anderson's going to be with me April the 4th. Ricky Wilson will be back. Leslie Midway will be back. And we've got Nicholas Giordano, my dear buddy, Professor Nick, will be with me Tuesday night, a week from tonight. He'll be on with me. And looking forward to having Professor. He's always such a great interview. Just absolutely fantastic. And I think it's either that or the 9th. He's on the 2nd or the 9th. We'll figure that out. But anyway, we hope that you'll be with us and stay with us here on the McFiles. And on the nights that we don't have a guest, you will have some gray-headed dude that runs his mouth a lot. Opine. Now, if it wasn't Good Friday, we do a wrap-up show. That's what we might do late Thursday night. We might just do a wrap-up show and look at some of the headlines of the week. Interact with you. I enjoyed that last night with you late after James. James couldn't be with me long. And I like when we interact with you. We're not going to do it tonight. But listen, let me tell you that we love you. We care about you. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for giving. Folks, we need your donations. We still operate 100% on your donations. And we don't have any qualm asking you for that. Zelle at chrismac44@gmail.com, paypal.me/themcfiles. We're giving out. This is what we do. This is our network. This is how we make a living. And we thank you for those that support us financially. One of the reasons we don't do sponsors, we got one sponsor, and that's Natalie Corbin. And that's Who's Your Warrior Coffee, and I'll come over here and I'll show you that right now. Hang on just a second. Let me turn that off. The only sponsor that we really have is this right here, who'syourwarriorcoffee.com/MacFiles. And it's great coffee there in the state of Brownsburg, Indiana, city and state. And it's roasted coffee, great company, great people, veteran-owned. And you will not go wrong. You will not go wrong by getting that coffee, but it helps one of the sponsors. We could have a list of sponsors that have asked us through the years since we've been doing this to come on, and we've just took the donation route early on, and that's how we keep the show going. And we're not 501c3. We don't hide that. We've never hid that, and that's just how we sustain and we maintain. So please help us if you can. And we appreciate you. I will see you tomorrow night on the Faith Network. We've got a brand new hymn project coming out. We're going to share some of those songs we did tomorrow night. And we'll see you in the morning on the Faith Study on our McFiles Faith Network as well. So, busy week ahead still. Good Friday's coming. A lot of faith this week. A lot of faith. Did you enjoy Bill Federer tonight? Please put some fire in that house. Get that book of his. And may the Lord bless you as our prayers tonight on this Tuesday night. Our prayers for the people of Baltimore and those affected by this terrible bridge collapse. Join us on the Telegram room. We got some stories that we posted tonight. Very troubling stories at that, some of them. So listen, you be good out there. Have a good night. And I will see you when I see you tomorrow on the Faith Network. And until then, Mr. McDonald out on a Tuesday night. May the Lord bless you as our prayers. Be blessed, everybody. Take care. Good night, everybody. See you tomorrow. It's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk. It makes me tend to leave my sleeping bag rolled up and stashed behind your couch. It's knowing I'm not shackled by forgotten words and laws, and the ink stains that have dried upon some line. That keeps you in the back roads by the rivers of my memory, that keeps you ever gentle on my mind. It's not clinging to the rocks and ivy painted on their columns now that bind me, or something that somebody said because they thought we'd fit together walking. It's not knowing that the world will not be cursing or forgiving when I walk around the railroad track and find that you're moving on the back roads by the rivers of my memory, and hours you're just gentle on my mind. Though the wheat fields and the clotheslines and the junkyards and the highways come between us, and some other woman's crying to her mother 'cause she turned and I was gone, I still might run in silence, tears of joy might stain my face, and the summer sun might burn me till I'm blind. But not to where I cannot see you walking on the back roads by the rivers flowing gentle on my mind. I dip my cup of soup back from a gurgling, crackling cauldron in some train yard, my beard a rustling towel and a dirty hat pulled low across my face. Through cup hands round the tin can, I pretend to hold you to my breast and find that you're waiting from the back roads by the rivers of my memories, ever smiling, ever gentle on my mind.